The transmission came through shattered and distorted, a garbled mix of static and screams. Ambassador Elias Cade sat frozen before the holoscreen, his fingers digging into the polished steel of his desk. The distress call flickered in and out, the desperate voice of Elysium 3's governor barely intelligible beneath the chaos. "They're slaughtering everyone. No demands, no warning, by the stars, they're butchering us." Then the feed cut. Cade's breath hitched in his throat. His heart, steady and measured in every diplomatic summit he had ever attended, now pounded erratically against his ribs. He fumbled for manual override, rerouting the transmission through encrypted channels, trying to reconnect. Nothing. Elysium 3 was gone. He rose abruptly, knocking over his chair, the sound distant beneath the hollow roar in his ears. His mind clawed for reason, for logic, perhaps a sensor malfunction, a technical failure, a mistake. But deep inside, he already knew. The Zeldar Dominion had decided. They had not come to negotiate. They had come to erase. A chime cut through his thoughts. The door to his office slid open, and General Adrian Volkov strode in, her uniform crisp, her expression carved from stone. The lines of age and war etched her face, but now, something new shadowed her gaze. Something bleak. "It's confirmed," she said without preamble. Satellite relays intercepted partial footage before the blackout. She activated her wrist console, projecting a brief, flickering holofeed between them. It was brief, yet more than enough. Charred streets. Bodies sprawled in the open, twisted and burned beyond recognition. The grand halls of Elysium 3, where Cade had once delivered peace talks, reduced to rubble. But the worst. His throat clenched. A row of women, bound and kneeling. The Zeldar warriors, towering and clad in their obsidian armor, moved with mechanical precision, raising their plasma rifles. There was no hesitation, no spectacle, just execution. The feed ended. Cade swayed slightly, pressing a hand to the desk to steady himself. The weight in his chest threatened to crush him. Volkov exhaled slowly, the closest thing to emotion she allowed herself. "We estimate 90% of the colony's population is dead. The rest, if there are any survivors, they've been taken." Cade barely heard her. His mind drifted to Elysium 3's sunlit courtyards, the laughter of his wife as she chased their daughter through the gardens. The scent of lilac that clung to her hair. The warmth of small hands gripping his own. Gone. Volkov watched him carefully, her voice lowering. "Elias." He looked up, eyes unfocused. "The council is convening in 15 minutes. They'll want your statement." He forced his thoughts into order, tried to summon the practiced poise of a diplomat. But it was crumbling, dissolving into something raw, something dangerous. "They didn't take hostages," he said, his voice quieter than he intended. "They didn't seek leverage. They only sought annihilation." Volkov nodded grimly. "Yes. They wanted to make a statement." Cade turned away from her, his fingers curling into a fist. His title, his years of negotiation, all seemed meaningless now. The accords he had spent a lifetime constructing, the countless peace talks, what had they amounted to? Words had not stopped the massacre. He inhaled sharply. They wanted a statement? He met Volkov's gaze, steel now in his voice. "Then let's give them one." 15 minutes later, he stood before the United Earth Coalition's high command. The chamber was vast, domed, the air thick with the weight of unspoken grief. The faces of the assembled officials ranged from ashen horror to barely restrained fury. A live broadcast streamed across every colony, every military outpost, every human settlement in the galaxy. Cade stepped forward, placing his hands on the podium. He did not need a prepared speech. There was only one truth left to say. "The Zeldar Dominion has massacred the people of Elysium 3, he said, his voice steady, the rage beneath it tempered into something unbreakable. "They did not come to conquer. They did not come to negotiate. They came to exterminate." Silence stretched, heavy, suffocating. Billions watched, waited. Cade's grip tightened. For too long, we have extended the hand of peace. His gaze swept the council, daring them to look away. For too long, we have entertained the notion that diplomacy could deter those who see us as nothing more than insects to be crushed beneath their boots. He straightened, his shoulders squared. But now, humanity speaks in a language they will understand. He lifted his chin, delivering the words that would change the course of history. The United Earth Coalition formally declares total war against the Zeldar Dominion. No one flinched. No one hesitated. Across the chamber, a single hand slammed against the table. Then another. A rising chorus of fists striking wood, steel, glass. A sound that echoed across Earth and its colonies, reverberating through every human heart that had watched helplessly as their kind was slaughtered. A sound of resolve. A sound of war. Volkov approached as the council adjourned. Her voice measured but edged with something dark. "What are your orders, Ambassador?" Cade exhaled, staring at the star map that flickered to life before him. The worlds of the Zeldar blinked in defiant, untouchable red. That would change. His words came without hesitation. "We burn them to the ground." The first strike came without warning. Zeldar outposts along the Orion Spur detected nothing unusual. Just the cold silence of space, the rhythmic patrols of their warships gliding through the void. Then, in a single coordinated moment, the silence shattered. Human dreadnoughts erupted from warp, their hulls gleaming obsidian against the distant starlight. By the time the Zeldar even registered their arrival, it was too late. The UES Vengeance, the spearhead of Earth's war fleet, unleashed a payload of antimatter torpedoes that swallowed the nearest warship in a white-hot implosion. The Zeldar command station barely had time to issue an alert before the second wave struck, railgun slugs ripping through hull plating like paper. Human fighter squadrons danced through the chaos, weaving between plasma fire, delivering death with surgical precision. The orbital defenses on Kronthys 9, the Zeldar's largest forward operating base, powered up, but nothing could stop what had already begun. From the bridge of the Vengeance, Ambassador Elias Cade stood motionless, watching the devastation unfold. The man who had once built treaties now issued kill orders. He listened as fleet commanders relayed casualty numbers, not theirs, but the enemy's. It wasn't war. Not yet. This was something else. It was a reckoning. "Primary defenses are crippled, sir," Admiral Adrian Volkov reported, her voice sharp and unwavering. "We have full orbital control. Ground forces standing by." Cade did not hesitate. "Commence planetary assault. No prisoners." Volkov nodded, transmitting the order. Across Kronthys 9 surface, human drop pods rained from the sky like falling stars. Shock troopers emerged from the wreckage, armor gleaming, rifles humming with the energy of compressed plasma. They advanced with brutal efficiency, meeting the Zeldar defenders head-on. The enemy fought savagely, but their tactics were outdated. Zeldar warriors, towering and muscular, relied on intimidation, brute strength. They were used to enemies that cowered before them, that begged. Humanity had no more words to give. Within hours, Kronthys 9 burned. The remaining Zeldar commanders, desperate, activated a self-destruct sequence, hoping to take humanity's soldiers with them. But Earth's forces were already gone, extracted with near-perfect precision. They left only destruction in their wake. It was the first lesson delivered in blood and fire. In the days that followed, humanity struck again. And again. And again. No warnings. No negotiations. Only devastation. Zeldar colonies that had once stood for millennia fell in days. Their war fleets, so accustomed to dominance, crumbled before human technology. Ships driven by adaptive AI, weapons guided by predictive targeting systems that calculated outcomes faster than a Zeldar mind could process them. The enemy never stood a chance. Cade listened to the intercepted transmissions from the Zeldar homeworld. The fear in their voices was unmistakable. They spoke of humans the way ancient civilizations once whispered of vengeful gods, unstoppable, merciless, relentless. But it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. Volkov entered the command chamber, her expression unreadable. "Zeldar Supreme Chancellor has sent a transmission. He's requesting negotiations." Cade didn't look up from the battle map. Another Zeldar-controlled planet had just fallen. He studied the blinking red markers, their once mighty empire shrinking with every passing hour. They want peace. His voice was devoid of humor, but something dark lurked beneath it. Did they offer that to Elysium 3? Volkov didn't answer. She didn't need to. They both knew the answer. They're stalling, Cade continued. Trying to regroup, trying to salvage what's left of their empire. He turned to face her, his gaze colder than the void outside. Tell them there is nothing left to discuss. Volkov inclined her head. She made no attempt to challenge him. There was no need. This was not politics. This was survival. As she left, Cade turned back to the holomap. His fingers traced the trajectory of their next invasion. The Zeldar core worlds were within reach. The heart of their empire, where the High Council ruled from their gilded citadel, untouched by war for centuries. That was about to change. The Zeldar had wanted to make a statement. Now, humanity was about to make one of its own. The skies above Zephyrian Prime burned. Zeldar warships, once the pride of their empire, shattered under relentless human bombardment. The orbital defenses, formidable in past wars, now crumbled like brittle glass. Plasma cannons fired wildly into the void, but the enemy they faced did not engage in reckless charges or wasteful posturing. Humanity fought like a machine, precise, unrelenting, methodical. From the command deck of the UES Vengeance, Ambassador Elias Cade watched the battlefield unfold, his face illuminated by the glow of tactical displays. Zephyrian Prime was the last major stronghold before the Zeldar homeworld itself. They had concentrated the remnants of their fleet here, believing that sheer numbers and centuries of experience would hold back the tide. They were wrong. Their central command station is crippled, Admiral Adrian Volkov reported, her voice cool, controlled. Surviving warships are attempting to retreat. Cade's fingers drummed lightly against the console, his expression unreadable. Do not let them. Volkov relayed the order without hesitation. Human warships surged forward, cutting off escape routes, encircling the enemy like a tightening noose. On the screens before them, Zeldar vessels detonated one by one, their captains realizing too late that surrender was not an option. Cade leaned forward slightly. Begin ground operations. Moments later, the planet's atmosphere flared with streaks of fire, drop pods and assault carriers descending like vengeful spirits. The Zeldar had fortified Zephyrian Prime cities, turning them into fortresses. It would not matter. Human forces deployed with ruthless efficiency. Mechs outfitted with experimental rail weaponry tore through armored barricades. Infantry units, enhanced with exoskeletons, moved faster than the enemy could react, their precision strikes cutting down defenders before they could regroup. A few Zeldar legions managed to organize a counteroffensive, but the result was the same. Humans did not fight with honor. They fought to win. The battle lasted 4 hours. By the end, Zephyrian Prime was unrecognizable, its once gilded spires reduced to smoldering ruins, its streets littered with the bodies of those who had once called themselves conquerors. A transmission request came through. The Supreme Chancellor himself. Cade allowed it. The screen flickered to life, revealing the aged, weary face of the Zeldar leader. Once draped in ceremonial robes, he now sat in the wreckage of what had been his war council chamber. His silver eyes, once so filled with arrogance, held only defeat. This war has gone far enough, the Chancellor rasped, his voice hoarse. Our people, our civilians, suffer. Name your terms, Ambassador. Cade stared at him, expression unreadable. Terms. The Chancellor gave a slow, deliberate nod. Surrender, if you will grant our kind the right to survive. If you will show mercy. The word lingered in the silence between them. Mercy. Cade thought of Elysium 3, of the countless human colonies that had begged for that very thing. Thought of his wife, his daughter, reduced to ash by the same empire that now pleaded for compassion. He could almost hear their screams. You misunderstand, Cade said quietly. This is not a war of conquest. He leaned closer, his voice steady, absolute. This is extermination. The Chancellor's breath hitched. You. The transmission cut. Cade turned away. Prepare the fleet. Set course for the Zeldar homeworld. Volkov hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. Then she nodded. Understood. The war was not over. Not yet. But soon, there would be nothing left of the Zeldar dominion but dust. The skies over Zeldar Prime wept fire. Human warships hung in orbit, blotting out the stars, their silent presence more terrifying than the bombardment itself. The once mighty capital of the Dominion, a world that had never known invasion, now trembled beneath the weight of inevitable ruin. Great spires of obsidian and gold, monuments to centuries of conquest, lay broken and smoldering. The scent of burning metal and scorched flesh clung to the air, mingling with the acrid sting of plasma discharge. Ambassador Elias Cade stood at the edge of a shattered balcony in what had been the High Council's citadel. His dark eyes swept over the ruined city below, watching as human forces moved methodically through the streets, eliminating the last remnants of resistance. He felt neither satisfaction nor remorse. Only the hollow certainty that this was necessary. Behind him, Admiral Adrian Volkov approached, her boots crunching over the debris. "The last stronghold has fallen," she reported. "What remains of their leadership is requesting terms of surrender." Cade exhaled slowly. "There are no terms." Volkov hesitated, though only for a breath. "Understood." She turned to relay the final order, but Cade spoke again. "Have the civilians been evacuated?" A flicker of something unreadable passed over her face. "Most," she said carefully. "Some refused. Others never had the chance." Cade closed his eyes. He had ordered the non-combatants removed before the final bombardment, not out of mercy, but because mass slaughter would serve no purpose beyond empty brutality. Yet war was never clean. Some had been too stubborn, too proud, too afraid to leave. Others had been caught in the firestorm before an evacuation could even be attempted. He had told himself that their deaths were not his burden to carry. And yet, as he opened his eyes again and gazed upon the city's ruins, he felt the weight pressing against his chest. "Their kind would never have spared us," Volkov said after a moment, her voice measured, steady. "You know that." He did. He had seen the massacres, heard the screams. The Zeldar had never hesitated when it came to slaughtering humans. He had given them the same courtesy. And yet, the wind carried the scent of burning fuel and distant death. Somewhere below, a child was crying. It was not a human voice, but grief made no distinction between species. Cade turned back to Volkov. "Prepare the fleet to withdraw." She arched an eyebrow but did not question him. "And the Zeldar?" "They're finished," Cade said simply. "What few remain will never rise again." He let out a slow breath, the fury that had burned within him for so long now dimming to embers. "The war is over." Volkov studied him for a moment before nodding. "Understood." As she left to carry out his orders, Cade turned his gaze skyward, to the vast emptiness beyond. The stars had witnessed humanity's wrath, had watched as they carved a path of vengeance across the galaxy. But as he stood amidst the ruins of an empire that no longer existed, he could not help but wonder. Had humanity won? Or had they merely lost something they could never reclaim?